Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr and welcome to another Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now this week we're going to be encountering another Divine Summon board, which honestly I cannot wait for after the slew of terrible banners that I've had this past month. I could do with an injection of resources, and I'm sure lots of you guys could too. And it's also going to be accompanied by one of my favourite characters in the entire franchise, in Emperor, and his burst is one I've been excited for a very long time. And he's also being joined by another fan favourite character with her LD and rework that elevates her a big amount actually in Celes as well. Who's a character we haven't really covered all that much on this channel, but I'll be happy to do so here as she does get a heck of a lot with her LD and her rework. So if you'd like to learn more about Emperor, about Celes, about the Divine Ramuh event, and of course ultimately whether you should pull or not, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Of course, before we get started, don't forget to check out all of my social links in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Patreon. On Twitch, obviously, you've seen that I've been doing a lot more Final Fantasy XIV recently, so I have decided I'm going to be doing that every Tuesday night and Sunday morning now, as like my following for that on Twitch has been increasing gradually, and it's been lovely to play with you guys. So if you want to come and join in and you happen to be on the Chaos server, then definitely come and check out that on there as well. As of course, I always do my FF count up as well every Friday night. I'm very close to the end of FF3 now, and I've also got obviously all of the Dissidia Opera Omnia events as they happen as well, so loads to happen over on there. On Patreon, I always give a shout out to one of my patrons at random every time I release a new video, and today that person is going to be Winged Paragon, who is brand new to my Patreon, so a massive thank you goes out to you. I hugely appreciate every single one of my patrons, and we do have a voice chat coming up very soon as well. And if you would like a title card just like Winged Paragon has here, as well as other benefits such as the aforementioned voice chats that we all have together, and other benefits such as being involved with the Would You Pull section of my videos, then perhaps you might like to support the channel and become a patron yourself. It would be massively appreciated. And then don't forget, of course, to check out all of the other content creators for Dissidia Opera Omnia and all of the resources that I will have listed down in the description box below. So first things first, let's take a quick look at what we can expect from the banners themselves and what we can see coming from Emperor and Celes because of these banners. So first things first, with the banners themselves, like any burst-based banner, there's two of them. One of them will feature the featured character's full kit, the other will feature a different character. So the featured characters here are obviously Emperor and Celes. The banner that features just Emperor will be his EX, his LD, and his burst, of course, and will be accompanied by Selphie and Lulu EXs, whereas the other banner will not feature all of Emperor's kit, just his burst, and will feature Celes' brand new LD and the rest of her kit instead, and will also carry along Aiko and Yuffie for the ride. Now, these EX characters, as you well know, you're probably not going to use many of these at this point except for Chaos challenges. However, if you're not planning on pulling on Mog when he comes around in a little while, like in about a month's time, you might want to keep an eye out for Yuffie. So if you get her along the way, I'd be pretty happy about it. Anyways, going into Emperor, I've spoken about Emperor at great length in the past because he's actually one of my favourite characters. I love him in this game, I loved him in Dissidia NT, I loved him in the PSP Dissidias, and I just love his design in general, so I'm very excited for Emperor. Now, if you've not used him before, his main thing is setting up traps that he can either trigger himself, equating to multiple HP damaged attacks in a row, or he can wait for them to expire so that they go off on the enemy's turn and then they trigger that way as well. Now, Emperor has had a slight rework here, nothing huge, but it's still very helpful stuff. Both of his skills have had additional skill uses, so Beckoning, Blast and Flare combo, which is his single target trap, he gets an additional use of, which takes him up to 10 uses of it total, which is fantastic. And his Thundercrest, which is his AoE based trap, goes up by 2 uses, which takes it up to 8 uses. So he gets a lot more skill uses in general. Both of these now have lower action delay, so they're quicker, because one of Emperor's biggest problems after he got his LD the first time around, and I'll explain his LD in a little while, basically made it so that he could, had to maneuver around his LD, make sure that the traps were available before he got another turn. He'd have to set up, and the fact that he's quicker means that he's able to make better use of his HP plus that he gets from his LD. His EX sets up another trap. It actually sets up all three to a point where you get multiple HP attacks in a row after your opponent has taken a turn. What his LD did was trigger all of the traps whether they were there or not, so you didn't actually have to have the traps there, and it gave him a magnificent buff called Subjugation Scheme, which gave him more attack, initial bravery, and like more brave overflow, but more importantly gave him an HP plus, a triple plus, that is honestly one of the best in the game if it's set up correctly. As long as you have all 3 of his traps available, using his HP plus will trigger the traps but not dispel them, so you're able to use this as much as you want, and then you're getting the single target damage from Beckoning Blast's trap, the AoE damage from Thundercrest's trap, and then another AoE damage attack that delays by a turn from his EX Dreary Cell trap, and then a 2-hit Brave HP plus attack on the end of it. So you're getting a 4 HP dump attack that delays, and it just adds up to a huge amount of damage. And if you're setting up correctly, you can delay a single target pretty much indefinitely. But again, the problem he had is that he was always a little bit too slow to deal with it. But his rework helps by being able to set up the traps more easily. His LD board helps him quite a lot as well in terms of his damage capabilities, because now it's a double HP dump attack, so 3-hit AoE Brave HP followed by 5-hit AoE Brave HP. And then it also adds 4 more turns onto Measure of Conquest, which makes it 16 turns. So it lasts for ages, and you need it to. If you're going to use Emperor, Subjugation Scheme needs to be up at all times, if you can help it, so you've got access to that amazing HP triple plus. And on top of that, he gets more attack out of it. But like his Beckoning Blast gets a lot more bravery potency and overflow as well, so it all adds up to a lot more damage in total. And the best thing about his LD board is that he gets an additional effect to Subjugation Scheme, where his bravery can't go below 10% like by himself. So when you're triggering all of these amazing Brave HP attacks all in a row with HP triple plus, you're getting a lot more damage out of it because his bravery stays higher. So it all adds up to a much, much wider array of damage. However, Emperor is one of these characters that his burst kind of transforms him in a lot of ways. Like where I've said like Cecil's a must pull for this, that and the other, his burst is like really good, but it just augments the way he already plays by giving him additional stats and giving him extra use of his skills. Emperor wants his burst quite a lot, because what his burst does is enable a strategy that can pretty much nullify a lot of single target fights, provided you're not in a Lufenia fight where the enemy actually has to take a turn. The reason for this is because, honestly, all this text that you can see here is practically irrelevant. The reason it's so good is because if you already have Dreary Cell set up, so the trap that delays by a turn, you can use all of his skill, like you can use his EX and his LD skill, which will trigger Dreary Cell, delay your enemy by a turn, keep the Dreary Cell there, fantastic. Then all you have to do for the rest of his burst phase is just spam HP plus, and then they're getting delayed every single turn, and taking 4 Brave HP damage attacks every single turn. So it adds up to a massive amount of damage very quickly, and it also delays the enemy really significantly by 6 turns minimum, but because you've delayed them so much during the burst phase, Emperor's going to get more turns before their turn goes off, which means the traps are still there for you to then continue spamming HP triple plus and delaying them even further. Now, like I said, this isn't going to be useful for everything. There are a lot of Lufenia missions where the enemy is required to take a turn, and Emperor is obviously not going to be very good for that. But in certain situations, it's backbreaking. And that's before I've even gotten into the effects or anything of what the burst actually does. So it's a 100% AoE, 15-hit Brave HP attack to start with. It also triggers another trap. Now, this one can't be triggered by HP+, because it also delays. And if you were delaying everything by 2 turns every time, we might have to talk about it. But it's a defense-ignoring 5-hit AoE Brave HP with 100% AoE damage that also refunds bravery after you've hit with it. That has delay on it. So it's another trap to trigger when they do eventually get a turn. And then the burst effect is more bravery damage, and you also get a brave refund back whenever you're dealing HP damage to a debuff target, which if you're using Emperor is all of the time. If they're immune to his debuffs, you ain't taking Emperor. Now, Emperor is not a character you can take to everything. However, the improvements that he's gotten, mainly from his burst, if you already have his LD, yes, his rework and his LD boards are nice, and the fact that he does a lot more damage because of them, but he is a character that massively benefits from having access to his burst, just because that burst phase is so backbreaking to certain enemies. So if you're gonna go for Emperor, he's a character that actually really likes having his burst. His LD is fine, and he's still perfectly functional without it. But it's a big leap for him if he has got access to his burst. And like I said, he's a character that I absolutely fawn over and love. So he's a character that I will want to use at any given opportunity, much like Kuja. But like I said, but I can be objective, and I can say that Emperor is not amazing for every single situation. He is also a hog of the debuff slot. He takes up 4 debuffs ordinarily, 5 if his burst effect is up, with traps that don't really do a lot for anyone but him. They're minor defense debuffs. His generic debuff is a speed down. They don't actually do a lot. They're there for him to trigger his traps repeatedly with HP pluses. So if you want more impact from your debuffs than just I benefit Emperor, then he's probably not going to be the character for you. But his damage phases, his ability to just continually delay single target enemies for as long as he wants, like if you got the right situation set up, his damage is magnificent, then he's definitely a character I think worth keeping an eye on. Of course, Emperor also gets his level 80 and the fact that he gets an LD call and his regular call as well, which are new. However, I don't think these are quite as exciting as his burst or the rest of his kit, because Hellish Gale, while it's nice that it does do all of the traps, it does do Dreary Cell, so which means it's got the delay on it, and it's got the splash damage on it and everything, it's pretty much just damage, and that's all it really does. Like, it doesn't add an awful lot to it because it doesn't actually put the traps on them, because just like his regular LD call, it just triggers them whether they're existent or not. And then his regular call is Beckoning Blast, which is kind of meh. I kind of rather that this had been Stygian Swell, because I think that Stygian Swell is a much better trap than Beckoning Blast, and lowering defense by a little bit isn't really going to do a lot. So if you're pulling for a character for their call, I wouldn't pick Emperor. However, like, his high armor, I would give to him. It's a tactics keystone, so it drops your enemy's stats and dropping their defense is quite handy, certainly for him. And having the extra, like, brave damage limits and stuff like that, like, exceeded, like, that's going to be really handy for him. If you're able to, like, I mean, his potencies are very rarely going to hit damage cap, but when they do, you want him to get off as much of those brave HP attacks as possible, and having your opponent's defense lowered further is going to help him do that. Artifacts-wise, he's got a max brave attack raising C50, and he wants as much attack as he can physically get, so I'm not going to dwell too heavily on these. Now, if we want to talk about characters that kind of transform overnight with a rework and an LD, you don't get much of a better example of this than Celes. Now, Celes is a character that's very much kind of flown under the radar for a very long time, ever since she came out years ago at this point. And it's nice to see that she really does elevate herself up to the standard that she should be, because she's a fan favourite from Final Fantasy VI, and a lot of people love her. Now, originally, Celes is a tank, but she had a very unique niche in that she was designed to use her runic ability, which is carried over from Final Fantasy VI, to absorb magic damage. And that's exactly what she does. If you've ever used Leon, you'll kind of have an example of what to kind of go with Celes. So runic has like magic brave absorb, which allows her to absorb into bravery any magic damage that she would take, as well as reducing any magic damage that your allies take as well to deal with AoE attacks. So basically that was all she did. Like, there wasn't an awful lot else to her. She did have some party auras and little bits and pieces, but until now that was realistically all she did. Shine Edge was originally just a brave HP attack with 5 bravery hits, and it gave her some of her bravery back. But now it does have a lot more capabilities, because you get extra skill uses of it, so you now have 9 skill uses of this, which is as opposed to the 7 you had before. And now it heals the party's HP, as well as giving Ice Imperil. So as you'll see with going through the rest of her rework and everything else, she's now a tank that can give Ice Enchant and Imperil to the party as well. So she's a great alternative to Cecil if you don't necessarily want to take him for whatever reason. Now, Runic actually gets quite the overhaul as well, and Runic is one of these abilities that Brave Magic Absorb can absolutely ruin certain fights. If you take Celes to the right fight, she can nullify most of what the enemies do just with Runic alone. However, it's gotten quite a big overhaul as well. So originally, it was just a single Brave HP attack that followed up from the ability itself. She gained a bit of bravery back, as most tanks do. She refunded herself, and she gave herself Magic Brave Absorb and put lock on all of the enemies. Now you get an extra skill use of that as well, so it goes from 7 to 8, so 9 skills uses of skill 1, 8 of skill 2, which is a nice round number, and Magic Brave Absorb gets a lot of extra effect that it didn't have before. So it now enchants the party for ice, which it didn't do before. The party then gets HP damage resistance as well, so now it's not just about the magic damage, you are able to use this in a more generalized sense as well, and she increases her own attack while she's at it as well. Now, her EX attack, Spinning Edge, it's an okay attack. It's nothing particularly magnificent, but it does have access to a nice frame buff for her that gives her Brave and HP regen and increases her attack more as well. And it's got a decent recast rate on it as well that refunds her bravery like many tank attacks do. You've then got Party Max Brave up on it as well, and then you get a multiple HP dump on top of it to boot. However, her LD adds a lot to her kit. So Freeze Dive, her LD boards, I will just point out, don't really do an awful lot except for making her Brave Absorb last longer and just add more damage to her kit. So what I will tell you here is pretty much what you're going to get. So it's a 3-hit Brave HP. She regenerates Bravery after this due to her LD board, and then an 8-hit AoE Brave HP that deals split damage, heals the party for 50% of the damage dealt, and then he regenerates bravery as well. Also puts the Ice in Peril on, and also puts the lock on, the same sort of thing you'd get from Runic. If you have Runic on, which you will have, then you'll be able to extend that buff as well. And you also put a framed debuff on the enemy called Magitech Ice. Now, Magitech Ice, not only does it increase the amount of brave damage that they take, so that's already great. We've seen that from Hope, we've seen it from Jack. Increased bravery damage on a debuff, brilliant. But it also has a trap attached to it as well, and it's not a bad one either, because it's kind of Furion-esque in that it's a 3-hit Brave HP that's elemental for ice, because a lot of their stuff is elemental for ice, if not all of it. It recovers HP and bravery for the party while you're at it, so it's just really good stuff all around. So she's not only is she gaining all of these buffs for herself, she's now able to support the party just by being there. And you'll also notice that with the Power Stone activations, she doesn't just raise her own attack, she also raises her party's attack up for it as well. And she also starts with Brave Magic Absorb, so you can start with her LD and you'll be able to get an extra long duration for that before you actually have to start using Runic at all. You can use Runic because it actually has a stack ability on it, like levels 1 to 5. But all that really does is increase her max bravery, and you can either increase this by using Runic or by using Freeze Dive, which is her LD attack, because that increases it by 2 levels, or by taking a magic bravery attack. Now, Celes is one of these characters that if you take her to the right fight, she completely trivializes it. If 90 to 100% of the enemy's attacks are magic based, she just completely ruins what they do. Like, you know, as long as they don't absorb ice, of course. If they absorb ice, Celes isn't going to be your main go-to tank. However, under the right circumstances, again, Celes, just like Emperor, can completely trivialize certain fights. Just because reducing in magic bravery damage her allies take, the HP damage they take, being able to just absorb any single target damage onto herself. If it's magic damage, she literally eats it as bravery and throws it back at them because of the trap. It's like, she does a lot all at once, and her party auras aren't to be sniffed at either. She obviously has Enchant in Peril access. She now has speed up buffs through her crystal passives. She's got 90% attack up for the party if you take her LD into consideration. And obviously her debuff increases bravery damage taken as well. There's a lot to really like about Celes. There are situations where she's not going to be as desirable as certain other tanks. Like if they're not magic based and they're purely physical based, you can still take Celes, but there are going to be characters you're probably more likely to take, such as Gladio or like Barsh, characters like that. Like, we're not actually that far away from Barsh's LD boards at this point. There are characters you could take over her. but she's just a really good character. There's so many things that you can do with Celes that you can't do with other characters because Runic is so unique to her, and she just compounds that with all these extra debuffs, extra buffs. The fact that she puts a trap on and she literally can just go, I'm absorbing this damage, and then literally throwing it back at you on the same turn is really, really nice stuff. And I just think that Celes is a character that a lot of people should be looking out for. Now, Celes also actually has a pretty nice cool abilities to go with her as well. So Runic is, well, Runic. Like, the fact that you have access to that as a cool ability is really nice. You get the lock, you get the Magic Brave Absorb. I mean, if you're taking Celes to a fight that's very predominantly Magic Brave, like to magic attacks, so that you want Magic Brave Absorb, you're probably going to take her in your party. But like with Kais, like showed this as well. Like you might well want to take Kais to most launch parties, but there are situations where you can't take him. And the same applies to Celes. And if you don't have room for Celes in your party, her call is pretty adequate as well. And then Freeze Dive does actually trigger a lot of what you would want from Freeze Dive. You get the Ice Resist down, you get Magitech Ice on top of it, you get all of that good stuff, and then both of these lock as well. So if you're using this on a character that benefits from being attacked, then you can definitely use Celes' call on that. And she does like have healing on her kit as well through her LD call. Like LD call healings are very, very like in demand. They're very nice to have. And she does a decent amount of damage, and it continues by having 4 turns of Magitech Ice on top of it, which continually heals you. So it's a very good LD call to boot. And obviously the bravery damage increase isn't nothing to sniff at either. She has Unity Keystone. You all know I love Unity Keystone. I think it's a great armor, so if you're going for Celes, I would pick this up for her. And then in terms of artifacts, Attack Max Bravery, she's an older character. Like, she doesn't have a fancy C50, she doesn't have a party aura based one. She just wants to attack in the Max Bravery so that she can churn out as much damage as she can. Okay, so now we've spent a lot of time talking about Celes and Emperor and what we've got to come with them. Let's talk about Ramuh. So these guys come with Divine Ramuh, which is a Divine Summon board just like we had with Diablos back when Ramza came out. So if you'd like to know more about Divine Summon boards, I do actually already have a video that enlists like everything that entails from a Divine Summon board, how you acquire the resources, how you go about farming it, making sure you bring the right synergy units for it, and obviously you're going to want to bring 3 of the units from these banners because they are going to be the most synergistic and help you get the summon points you need. But now that we've had Auto Plus, hopefully this should make for a much easier time in farming this particular event, because if you can set everything up correctly, between Auto Plus and Retry, the fact that we've gotten it a bit early, all you need to do is just leave it on play and then just press Retry as and when you need to. So hopefully we can get it all set up for that and it will be absolutely wonderful. That being said, with the Lufenia is actually like really easy if you've got the right characters for it, because the orb asks you to delay his turn. So basically pull out all the cheese you've got to just make it so that Ramuh never gets a turn and you'll be absolutely fine. There are loads of characters that can do delay, but if you have access to Emperor for obvious reasons, or Garland, if you have Garland, I'm jealous by the way, because I wanted Garland's LD and he just wouldn't let me have him. Then you can just delay pretty much indefinitely and he'll never get a turn. If you're using the likes of Kais, Cloud, characters that have delay, or Dark Knight Cecil, there's loads of characters that can do launch delay and they'll work really well because he does have quite a lot of health at 12 million, so he does have quite a lot that you've got to take down. He is also immune to paralysis, so if you're taking Cloud then just be mindful of that. He's also immune to HP attack disable, so Arciela and Kefka aren't going to do an awful lot here. But what you're wanting to do is just to make sure that Ramuh honestly never gets a turn. That is by far the easiest way for you to deal with it. However, if you're not going about it that way, basically what he does is he gets a 90% brave damage aura when he's done, while he's got his crystals present. So if you remember fighting him in the Ultimate Ramuh fight, he does a very similar thing here. After he does his recast, he summons these crystals. And basically the nasty thing about the crystals this time around is that as soon as they act, so does Ramuh. Like every time one of the crystals acts, and they always have framed turns as well, so you can't delay them. then you get Ramuh jump up and just decide to take a turn on top of it and throw lots of nasty Brave HP attacks at you. So basically you need to make sure that you're able to survive that. If you don't want to take Celes, then you can take Paladin Cecil. He'll help you survive a lot of that sort of thing. You want to take those crystals down as quickly as you can, because if you don't take those down, then it's going to make Ramuh himself a lot harder, because he can't be launched and he has that brave damage reduction. So you're expected to take a Enchant Imperil along with you, whether that be Celes or Cecil or something similar to that, then that's going to help you. But by and large, the easiest way to deal with this is just delay him so that he never gets a turn. So now comes the big question of the video, of course: should you be pulling for either Emperor or Celes? Now, I am a little biased here, I will say this now, and I will be as objective as I can, because I adore the Emperor. And I love his playstyle. I think he's one of the most fun characters in this game, and I think that the way that his kit and his burst, like, manifests is fantastic, and I love the way that he plays. However, I don't think he's for everybody. He is a very specialized character. He is more difficult with debuff management than some, and there are, you know, the fact that he has a burst that transforms his kit means that his burst is more impactful and therefore more needed to make him the best he can be than certain other characters, such as Cecil. But it is really transformative to him, and I'm really looking forward to it, to the point where I have considered going against my, like, all of my nature and everything that I tell everyone else to do, and I've considered burst tokening this thing day one, just because I'm looking forward to it that much. But Celes is also a really strong pick, so I think that, like, if you want characters that can trivialize certain fights, like Emperor, like, absolutely ruins this, like, Ramuh, like, in combination with certain other characters, because you just can't get a turn. And Celes, if you're against certain magic damage dealing, like, enemies, like, not only but this event, but events like Ishtola's event, she can practically trivialize certain fights too, because of her abilities to just kind of go, well, you're hitting me with magic damage, and what? If you liked Leon, you'll love Celes. It's pretty much as simple as that. And like I said, Emperor is very specialized as well. His burst phase, like, will continually delay an enemy and open them up to being delayed even further, and all within a really strong damage phase as well. And if you're against a Lufenia where you're against an enemy that is single target and doesn't require an enemy turn for you to keep up with the orb, Emperor is fantastic. But there are situations where you aren't going to use either of these characters and you will pick others over them. If you already have Emperor LD, because he did come out once before, like I do, I pulled for Emperor for this exact reason, Celes is really good, like, just generally. She is more specialized towards magic, but her Ice Imperil Enchant is really useful in a tanking mission where you can't necessarily take Cecil, because Holy Absorb is more popular. The ice, like, trap that she lays is really strong as well. And you know, pulling for Celes is a really strong opportunity for you to get at Emperor's Burst, so I will be doing that before I make any decisions about any burst tokens. But Aerith is coming up very soon as well, and she's also very powerful, so maybe you might want to bear that in mind as well. And honestly, if you're happy with your tanking capabilities, if you're planning on using Gladio or 8 is quite good in future events coming up too. Or Cecil, obviously, like, Cecil can be classed as a tank just because its healing capabilities are that strong, and the fact that he churns out much more offense, then maybe you could keep your resources for someone a bit less focused on one thing. But the fact remains, both of these characters are very, very honed on the thing that they're good at, and they're really, really good at what they do. And then finally, we all know what time it is. It's time for Would You Pull, a section of video where you, the viewer, get your chance to have your voice heard and let everyone know whether or not you're pulling on a banner and why. Now, I'm quite surprised, but I'm also not surprised by the results of this poll. Once again, huge thank you to all of my patrons for casting their votes and their comments. 0% of people have said no on this banner, which I find interesting. Like, I think that part of it comes down to the fact that Celes is an extremely popular character, and, like, Emperor is also really cool as well. And I mean, I love Emperor and I like Celes, but Celes is really popular. So as I said, 0% of people said no. Only 8% of people said they were going to use less than 100 tickets. 76% of people said that they were going to use more than 100 tickets, and 16% of people said yes to gems. So I think that, again, a lot of this comes down to Celes' popularity, but I also think that the fact that we're doing this on a Divine Summon board means that there's more resources to kind of throw at it, and I think a lot of people are skipping certain banners in the future to allow for this, and Celes and Emperor are both really nice characters to have. So, going into some of the comments, Kendall McKenzie says, for Emperor Celes banner, I probably won't pull for Emperor since I already have his LD. Just Celes. Emperor's an amazing character, and his traps are very unique and not something we see in OO very often. However, he doesn't last that long in contra in the future with his low potencies, and needs a setup to be at maximum efficiency, while Celes does everything you needed to off the get-go, and I see her lasting a little bit longer. If I get lucky, I get lucky. I agree with this. I think that, like I said, there's a bias for me that loves Emperor, but don't be fooled in thinking that he's amazing at everything. He is a very focused character on what he does. His potencies, while they're improved, are still on the lower end of the spectrum, and he is a very specialized role in that he has that continual delay, and his damage can be really good if you set him up correctly. So by taking characters like Cecil, Kryl even during his burst phase is really good, but he does require setup that Celes doesn't. Celes kind of just does her thing and she's very good at it, so that, you know, that's something definitely worth bearing in mind. Sakuraba Neku says, going gems here. I like Celes, and a kit as a tank is always welcome, as having another one adds flexibility for more team compositions, something we've learnt the hard way rushing through Dimension's End. Having the resources from the spring campaign in Divine Ramuh also adds to this decision. Yay for free stuff. There is a free pull on both of these banners, so we can hope that we can get lucky on that, as well as the fact that we've obviously got the resources coming from all of this stuff on top of it. It's a nice banner to pull on, because there's nothing wrong with either of them. They're both good characters. I think the majority of people are going to be pulling for Celes over Emperor, but certainly if you don't have the LD. If you don't have the LD for Emperor, I would pick Celes first, definitely. Multiration Lion says, Celes is gems. She and Aloka 2 are my favourite characters from FF6 and among my favourites in the franchise. I plan to get Emperor's LD in his Lost chapter so I can ensure I could use gems here, which is pretty much what I did, but I'm going to be using tickets because I've spent a lot of gems already these past few weeks, and I'm planning on spending gems in the near future as well. One of the best tanks in the game gets a massive upgrade here, and a phenomenal costume besides. Sorry Joe, but I've got to disagree with you here. I'll get to this in a second. I also don't have her EX, making her the very last one I need to pick up. Emperor's Verse is also very good, and I intend to try and pick it up either here or on Aerith's banner. Now, Aerith's banner is where I'm planning on using gems, but Celes is a very solid place for you to use gems as well if you want to. The costume thing, I'm starting to come around on Celes' costume. I don't like it, or I didn't like it, because the colour scheme is kind of all over the place. It's white, it's pink, it's green, it's blue, it's the shoes. Like, it looked like an ouch fit as far as I was concerned. However, I do understand the reverence to FF6 and the fact that that's what Celes looks like in her game. Although, honestly, if I had my way, I'd have picked the opera outfit for Celes instead. Just saying. And then finally, Booper Wiggum says, I'm nearly maxed on tickets, lucky. Already have Emperor LT, and with the Ramuh board ticket train coming, Celes is a perfect banner for me to drop some of my stash into. Celes is one of those characters that won't be used everywhere, but where she shines bright. 100%. Like I said, Celes can be used more generally, but she's not going to be the first pick for physical-based fights, because you have the likes of Gladio, Galoof when he comes out later on down the line as well. But I think Celes is a really solid character for a lot of people to have. She's really beneficial to newer players as well, because she does so many different things all at once. And honestly, that trap does damage, I'm telling you. So that's going to be all from today's video. Thank you very much for watching, and once again thank you to those of you who put out your votes and your comments. Let me know in the comments below whether you're planning on pulling for either Emperor or Celes or both. If you haven't got the LDs for either of them, just give us all a shout and let us know. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications on any future videos I might be making, whether it be for Dissidia, Opera Omnia, or other things. And I will catch you in the next one. So thank you all very much for joining me, and I will see you then. Take care.